Good morning, everybody, and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this launch, the launch of our report. We need to talk, measuring intercultural dialogue for peace and inclusion. I'm very proud to share it with you online. Of course, you will be receiving a copy of it whenever we finish with this presentation. But this is our contribution to really improve the way our societies, our communities, people talk together. I am Gabriela Ramos. I'm the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences here at UNESCO. And I'm very pleased to be your host today and to be conducting the proceedings of this debate. Intercultural dialogue is a powerful but underutilized tool in terms of bringing people together and committing to a meaningful and open communication for transformative change. Today, you will hear stories on how intercultural dialogue is already being used to promote peace and human rights around the world, in Ghana, in Iraq, in Jamaica, in Oman, as well as how organizations like the Berghoff Foundation, UNDP, MINUSMA changed lives with this tool. Before today, however, stakeholders faced substantial challenges as we did not have the knowledge needed to leverage the full potential of intercultural dialogue as a tool, as I said, to build peace, cohesive, and resilient societies. So what we want to bring with this proposition that we're doing today is to have a tool that countries and communities can use. But let me first and foremost thank the government of Canada and the government of Kazakhstan, because they have been key in supporting intellectually, but also financially, the development of this program. We also would not be here without the work of our partner in this endeavor, the Institute of Economics of Peace, and you will be hearing from their leadership, but also from the experts that help us bring this piece of work together. And no, we are at the moment that is really, we always say that we are at the crossroads. Probably my grandfather and my dad must have said that in their current times. But the reality is that the challenges that we're facing now, in terms of trying to get to overcome the COVID legacies, in terms of times of war, conflict, division, in terms of massive flows of refugees, of migrants, of the backlash against the human rights of women, so many challenges we are facing, the question of mounting inequalities, the question of climate change. It seems that the agenda that we have today in our world is very, very complex. And what we see is that instead of these challenges bringing us together as humanity, to find the solutions, to find the answers together, listening to each other, the different ways in which we can contribute to find solutions, we are more and more divided. And therefore, I feel that besides trying to look for very specific solutions, the challenges that I mentioned, we really need to look to intercultural dialogue, to better understanding, as I said, of our countries and our communities, to address the issues. We know, for example, that discrimination is on the heights. It's really increasing massively. There was a 339% increase of discrimination against people from Asian descent in the US. And this is the places where we measure these things. And also the growth in anti-Muslim hate speech in the platform economies. We know gender discrimination, as I said, the backlash. And this is why UNESCO, with our mandate to promote peace and cultural understanding, has developed this framework to enable intercultural dialogue and accompanying a global report with the Institute of Economics and Peace. We do not only believe in the power of the bridging countries together through dialogue, but with this new data, with this information, with this evidence, very rigorous evidence that we have put together, we hope that more countries will be enticed to use and rely on this for moving forward. This is the first of its kind. The framework and report are a guide not only to understanding what are the issues, in intercultural dialogue, but also specific opportunities and challenges facing countries and regions in harnessing the power of this tool for greater societal benefits. Through the data we have produced for 100 countries, we are equipped with the knowledge needed to inform better policy to strengthen support towards this mean. And we have the information needed to best prioritize and sequence investment to enhance the potential dialogue. And the findings tell a compelling story to this end. Will you hear more about in some minutes? But allow me to mention just some of the issues that I found really, really encouraging and positive. We have discovered that the enabling environment needed for intercultural dialogue to flourish work strongly as a system. It's not just one element, one pillar. It's the compound effect of all the pillars that bring the strength in all these enabling domains. And this means that everyone, from legislators to students, have the potential to create opportunities for dialogue, and that decision makers can select particular areas to focus on to respond, for example, to the availability of resources or pressing political priorities, while strengthening the whole range of conditions that you will hear in a minute that make dialogue work. Our findings also show that while strong economic development can help support an environment when intercultural dialogue flourishes, is not always a correlation. It's not that if you are in a lower development rank, you will have worse intercultural dialogue. It doesn't work like that. It helps, of course, to have solved some of the economic issues, but there is not a direct link. Actually, the findings show that interventions with a relative low cost can make big difference to opportunities for intercultural dialogue, reinforcing the importance of all countries prioritizing investment in the approach regardless of their economic position. This is a very important point for the member states of UNESCO because it's a positive message. Anybody can practice it, anybody can promote it. We have also shown that leadership matters. Political leadership which prioritizes intercultural dialogue can help forge an environment where dialogue can thrive, and even where challenges exist across other areas which are known to help support change. And investments in operational leadership, which is competent, skilled, and organized in its facilitation of these dialogues, it has proven to be one of the most important ways to improve the wider enabling environment for dialogue. And we know that the data is also showing us how dialogue can generate transformative impact. In our report, we showed that violence against civilians was incredibly 98% lower in the countries with very high capacities 90% lower in countries with very high capacities for dialogue compared to those low capacities. It's almost obvious. If you can talk, if you can bring together people around the table, conflicts might diminish. But how do we do it? That's the point. Countries with low capacities for dialogue score 77% lower in terms of gender equality than those with high capacities for dialogue. And 30% of people in countries with low capacity for dialogue live in absolute poverty compared to those countries that are in better position. So our conclusions in terms of how people living in countries with high capacities for intercultural dialogue might also lead to higher ranking in, for example, the Human Development Report or in many other areas is really a very important message. And that's why our commitment of UNESCO to forge, to pursue, to promote intercultural dialogue does not finish here. We have been working for 2 years, and I recognize here our staff here in the social and human sciences, starting with Ana Maria Magloff, the head of the section, and Ewan McKay-Jones, who was McQuaid-Jones, who was the lead author of the report. But the many people that contributed across the house with the contributions, as I said, of the Institute of Peace. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. because we want to establish also a program that will help us pilot policy dialogues, taking a deep dive into country-level data with national policymakers and working together to create action plans, leverage existing UNESCO tools and technical capacities to make meaningful data-led improvements to further strengthen opportunities for dialogue as a means of tackling pressing challenges. We hope that this tool and this work will also help us with other areas in which UNESCO has a very strong mandate. For example, in countering increased racism and discrimination, we're going to bring this dialogue to the Global Forum against this terrible ill of racism that will happen in Mexico on the 28th and 29th of November, and we hope to see you all there. And we are going to be bringing ministers, and as we do today, where we are accompanied by distinguished ministers who will speak about their own experience, to make sure that this is not only an academic exercise, a fantastic intellectual journey, but a tool to promote peace. I think we have connected some of the contributors to the report. I cannot mention them all, but I know that Veronica Boas was going to be participating. I know that Belinda Praise, who started this job in UNESCO, and now she's taking a very nice change in her career, but I want to also thank her for this. So without any further ado, let me just introduce to you Mr. Steve Kilelea, founder and executive director of the Institute of Economics and Peace, who will share a brief message for then pass the word to the presenter, David Hammond, who led the work from the Institute of Economic Peace, who will also then deliver the whole presentation of the framework. So please, if we can go to the video and then to David.
It's my pleasure to be here with you at the launch of the Intercultural Dialogue Barometer. I think this becomes an especially important timing, and I really wish I could be there in person, but I'm actually up in Dharamsala with 2 days with the Dalai Lama at the moment. Now, we're looking at dialogue, particularly intercultural dialogue. It's the key for developing peace. It creates a level of understanding between the parties and builds empathy between people who, if they weren't speaking, probably wouldn't have it. The timing of this report is truly important. It's truly important. If we're looking at many of the issues facing the world today, we can see that a lack of intercultural dialogue or lack of intercultural understanding really lies at the heart of many of these issues. So just give you an idea of how big the problem is. 1.5 billion people live in countries with low intercultural dialogue. And that's a very, very large number. Now, to drive it home even further, if we look at the countries suffering from conflict today, 89% of them suffer also from low intercultural dialogue. And again, this drives home how we really need to be able to look at the issues, bringing people together so they can meet and talk and start to better understand how they can find the issues they have in common and the problems which they can solve together. This report is based on data from over 160 countries, so it is comprehensive. And again, I wish I could be there in person, and I hope you enjoy the presentation on the report.
Thank you so much to Steve for this message. And I have to say that he couldn't come, and this is virtual, so it's fine for now. But we will be working with him closely. And now let me give the floor. It's my pleasure to introduce David Hammond to present the outcomes of our joint work. So, David, the floor is yours.
Well, it's a great pleasure to join you today for the launch of the UNESCO Initiative for Enabling Intercultural Dialogue. I'm joining you from Sydney at our Institute for Economics and Peace headquarters, My name is David Hammond. I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Economics and Peace, and I've been working with UNESCO over the past couple of years on this framework and report, and really excited to see it launch. First of all, I'd like to start with a quote from Luis Rodriguez, who was a Colombian military serviceman, served during the Colombian conflict, but was also a part-time goalkeeper. And when interviewed on the benefits of sport and dialogue in post-conflict Colombia, this is what he said. In this war, talking about the Colombian conflict, we were taught to have enemies. And here, talking about the football pitch, we were reminded that enemies have families and problems too. That really talks to the essence of what we've been working towards with this Enabling Intercultural Dialogue initiative. It's really trying to identify the value of intercultural dialogue and identifying the enabling environments that allow effective intercultural dialogue to occur. So what I'm going to do now is just go through some high-level points. The agenda for today is, first of all, I'll go through the initiative, then I'll introduce intercultural dialogue, then I'm going to go through how we've measured intercultural dialogue in the report and the research, and I'm going to end with next steps in enabling intercultural dialogue. Some high-level findings in the report. 1.5 billion people live in countries with low levels of intercultural dialogue. 69% of terrorist attacks globally occurred in countries with low intercultural dialogue in 2019. 89% of all current conflicts are occurring in countries with low intercultural dialogue. 91% of refugees in 2020 were from countries with low intercultural dialogue. And finally, 30% of people in countries with low intercultural dialogue live in absolute poverty. So you can see that intercultural dialogue is having strong relationships with many of the development indicators that we all care about. So a little bit about the initiative. The UNESCO Initiative for Enabling Intercultural Dialogue has been developed in partnership with the Institute for Economics and Peace to address the ICD knowledge gap and support more effective dialogue. Through the initiative, UNESCO is producing the following. There's a conceptual and technical architecture for enabling intercultural dialogue. There's a UNESCO framework for enabling intercultural dialogue. There's a global analytical report, which is the main piece that I've been working with UNESCO on for the past couple of years. And then there's also a dialogue support facility. Introducing intercultural dialogue. As with all good researchers and research projects and metrics, we always start with a definition. And the definition for this initiative is that intercultural dialogue is a process undertaken to realize transformative communication that requires space or opportunities for engagement and a diverse group of participants committed to values such as mutual respect, empathy, and a willingness to consider different perspectives. So that's the technical definition that we've used in the report, but also I think that really talks to Luis Rodriguez's quote, especially about requiring space or opportunities for engagement and a diverse group of participants committed to values such as mutual respect. So where does intercultural dialogue take place? Intercultural dialogue takes place in many forms, including verbal and non-verbal, in-person and virtual, and between individuals and between groups. Intercultural dialogue works at the local, national, and international levels. What can intercultural dialogue do? It can catalyze action against and address root causes and structural drivers of violence and conflict. And certainly the quantitative results show a very strong relationship to peace and security within the metrics. It can mobilize a diverse range of actors. It can change mindsets, and it can increase linkages and connections between and across groups. The architecture that we've developed is the output of an expert panel process. The architecture focuses on 5 fields where intercultural dialogue activities occur. and takes a two-level approach to analyze 9 domains identified as enabling intercultural dialogue. The two-level approach was taken because it was recognized that intercultural dialogue occurs across the board. There are indicators that are relevant at the micro level, and there are indicators that are relevant at the macro level. At the macro level, we have structural domains, and these are the domains that, if they are strong, they create the enabling environment for intercultural dialogue to take place. And the 5 structural domains include freedom of expression, governance and citizenship, horizontal equality, social cohesion, and stability and nonviolence. The supporting domains at the micro level include inclusion and representation, leadership and organization, linkages and coherency, and skills and values. And this systems diagram shows how the macro and the micro levels interact with each other. On the left-hand side, you have the supporting domains, leadership and organization, inclusion and representation, linkages and coherency, and skills and values. And they enable the structural domains to create effective opportunities for ICD. And the structural domains include horizontal inequalities, stability and nonviolence, governance and citizenship, freedom of expression, and social cohesion. You also have a number of factors that play into both the supporting and structural domains to create effective intercultural dialogue. So media and ICT plays a role. Culture and the arts obviously plays a very significant part of intercultural dialogue. Local governance and urban planning, political negotiation and education. And these factors all interact with each other, and if they're interacting well, they form the environment that allows for effective intercultural dialogue to take place. Measuring intercultural dialogue. So the UNESCO Framework for Enabling Intercultural Dialogue is an online platform with data on the 9 domains I mentioned before. And these are measuring what enables intercultural dialogue for over 160 countries in all regions. Why did we develop a framework? A framework is useful in supporting effective intercultural dialogue, and it allows attention to be drawn to multiple areas across the 2 levels, the macro and micro levels. It's more than the sum of a set of domains, but rather it is how these domains interact with each other that is of interest when thinking about intercultural dialogue. There are many other measurement approaches out there. One prominent is the Composite Index, rank countries on aggregate scores approach. However, in this case, for intercultural dialogue, it was decided that this approach would give the impression that ICD is a linear process and that you can just sum the parts to get the whole, when it was widely recognized that the path to developing effective intercultural dialogue is non-linear. So we've not created a composite index, and rather created a framework that allows for drill down into the data to understand what strengths and challenges lay for intercultural dialogue within regions and countries. So there's no overall score for the framework. Instead, the framework is intended as a tool for researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to assess the strengths and elements that are required to achieve effective intercultural dialogue, and point to where or areas that interventions could be prioritized. The initial impetus for this was the recognition that there was a knowledge gap for intercultural dialogue and how it can be enabled. So through the framework, we've already learned the enabling environment for intercultural dialogue functions as a system, with improvements in one domain being associated to improvements in other domains. In other words, all of the domains are mutually reinforcing. One of the key findings in the research for me is that a strong economic foundation supports a strong enabling environment for intercultural dialogue, but it's not a necessary condition. It means that effective intercultural dialogue can be fostered and developed across all countries, regardless of their economic foundations. And there are strong correlations between intercultural dialogue and peacefulness, conflict prevention, fragility, and human rights protection. And this all bears out in the quantitative analysis within the report. So the actual tool and the results of the tool are characterized in this slide. This slide shows the relative score of the structural domains and supporting domains across all regions. The measurement provides information on the relative strengths of regions and countries within the ICD domains. The metrics are on a scale, are normalized on a scale from 0 to 1, with 1 being a perfect score. And this chart shows the regional distribution of scores. A key point here is that no one region has a perfect score in any of the domains, which means that every region can improve in their efforts to encourage and enable intercultural dialogue. The purpose of measurement, it also allows a greater understanding at the domain level to see where programs aiming at improving ICD may want to focus. So here we have the 9 domains for Africa, and you can see that the relative strengths and weaknesses lie, which will provide useful information for policymakers and practitioners to decide where best to focus their efforts. And the metric itself and the data allows policymakers, practitioners, and researchers to drill down to the regional or country level. So here is a similar bar chart for the Arab states. You can draw similar charts across all 160 countries to really understand where the strengths are within each and where challenges may lie. So finally, just would like to end on the enabling intercultural dialogue and what the next steps are from this initiative. So following this launch of the UNESCO framework for enabling intercultural dialogue and the publication of the report we're launching today, We Need to Talk, UNESCO hopes to continue to grow ICD with a dialogue support facility. And in doing so, it plans a series of pilots with countries to support capacity building and policy guidance. And this framework will act as an input to those conversations and program planning going forward. So with that, I would just like to reiterate, it's a real pleasure to join you today. I'd like to thank you and leave you with the point on let's keep talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. It looks like an unsurmountable task to promote intercultural dialogue. If you see the pillars and the enable environments, the macro, the micro, but the reality is that something that we can build day by day, and that actually we need, as I said at the beginning, leaders, we need the policymakers to advance this agenda in a very concrete manner. And therefore, we're very pleased to have this second segment of the event, where we will be discussing with the ministers of some of the participating countries that can share with us the how to promote intercultural dialogue and how this has an impact in terms of their own agendas, and then to move into the expert panel. So I want to welcome today Her Excellency Olivia Grange, Minister of Sports, Youth and Culture of Jamaica. Jamaica is featured in the We Need to Talk report as a success case within the Latin American region and the Caribbean, scoring highly across the different domains within the UNESCO framework for intercultural dialogue. I think we also have Your Excellency, the Minister Muhammad Al-Mamari. I think you are connected. I see you there from the very beginning. Great to welcome you. Minister of Endowments and Religious Affairs of Oman. And thank you for your government. Your ambassador here really had been very supportive of these efforts. And Oman has made dedicated efforts to strengthening intercultural dialogue. That is also noted in our report for scoring highly across different domains of the framework. I think we're also expecting the Minister of Iraq and the Minister of Ghana to connect. They have sent us some notes to tell us that they are trying to be with us. I hope they will be able to come. But in any case, I think that with these two wonderful ministers, we will kick off the conversation. And I would like to ask you, what is your take of what you have heard from now? Your initial views of the necessity to foster intercultural dialogue, and how you connect it, because you both of you have your own agendas, you have your own budgets, you have your own outcomes, you have your own priorities, and so how would you connect that, and how intercultural dialogue can also help you to get better outcomes? So the floor is your, Minister Branch, and then I will ask Minister Al-Mamary, please.
Thank you so much, Excellencies. In a world where diversity is a constant after centuries of movement in peoples, forced and voluntary, across borders, and for various purposes, a diversity, unfortunately stratified along various lines of divisiveness, racism, ethnicity, xenophobia, class systems and structures, and economic achievement, the tendency for instability, insecurity, and violence is rife. This has been exacerbated over the years by policies and programs that have entrenched such negatives as systemic racism, inequalities, and the dominance of the wealthy over and above the exploitation of the poor and vulnerable. So in these situations, the world, its nations, communities, cities, social relationships, tethers on the edge of devolution into social rivalries and hostilities. So in such cases, there is need for deliberate policies aimed at promoting intercultural dialogue as a deliberate, coherent response. The fact is that these situations of multiculturalism provoke insecurities that often explode into ethnic and other cultural violence as minorities or the impacted respond to the perceived need for self-preservation. So in the case of Jamaica, the majority of our people were forcibly removed from Africa and forcibly introduced to European enslavers and colonizers and Asian indentured workers on plantations. This situation could have created all sorts of racial and ethnic rivalry and hostility. Our government responded by promoting intercultural dialogue aimed at crafting a society of relative stability, peace, and social and racial harmony. First of all, at independence, we embedded in our motto, out of many, one people, a national intercultural dialogue which sought to promote a society which understood the need to give space to all the peoples who came, regardless of from whence they came. It was about enshrining their right to be by giving it prominent placement in the national motto. Additionally, in support of this, we have ensured that the cultural content of all our celebrations of our national identity, heritage, and pride reflect the various elements of the culture of all who came and who later formed the Jamaican identity. So that our recent celebrations of the 60th anniversary of our independence included the African, the Indian, the Chinese, the European elements of the society and their story, which made up the story of the Jamaican people on a whole. This has not always been easy. And as such, the socio-cultural dialogue on this matter is still ongoing. For example, there still remains some level of tension within the Afro-descendant population which reflects over 90% of the population, that they, as majority, have largely not been able to access the various embodiments of success, and instead represent the largest percentage of the poor, the vulnerable, the unemployed in Jamaica. In other words, as our nation seeks to promote prosperity for all, there is a challenge that the majority of Afro-descendant population, who remain the poorest segment of the population, need to be given more than a fighting chance at this elusive prosperity. And this persistent poverty among this principal subset of our population remains the most volatile for situations that may lead to violence. In other words, the transformation that must result from a process of intercultural dialogue may elude us if the expected outcomes, in this case, a sense of achievement and belonging among a certain subset of the population, is not manifested in the lives and livelihoods of the targeted population. People may not commit to national development if the socio-political and cultural discourse does not promote achievement of better livelihoods for all our people. So, you know, our national hero made a quote that reminds us that intercultural dialogue is a process that will require constant revisiting, interrogation, and reset, as the desired outcomes may not be achieved by simple insertion of a cultural policy of inclusion in national celebrations. I conclude by saying that this dialogue must also be inserted in policies related to housing, education, health, security, etc. This is the only way to ensure that intercultural dialogue will be expansive and encompassing and ultimately impact the peace, security, and development of our country. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Grange. I think you really cover some of the core issues, because the fact is that intercultural dialogue is just a mean, and it's not an end in itself. And you're showing how much using or relying on it might help us deliver better on what we care about in terms of having a quality of life and being included. And I will get back to that, because this is a very important point, because it linked with the challenges we're facing now. We'll get back to you in a minute, but I want to give the floor to Minister Almamari, also to share with us his initial thoughts, and the floor is yours. Minister, it seems that you are muted.
Yeah, sorry for that. Greeting of peace to you all, Your Excellencies, and everyone has joined us this evening. The Sultanate of Oman has intercultural dialogue at the forefront of its interests and international priorities, based on its belief that intercultural dialogue is the path towards peace in the world and coexistence between people and communities, as it is the way for development, progress, and advancement of all peoples. We believe that diversity is a genuine reality, and that coexistence must become our permanent reality. We don't treat intercultural dialogue only as a mean of communication. As to us, intercultural dialogue doesn't only foster trust, mutual respect, and understanding, but is actually the core and heart of peace building and development. This is because it is only through intercultural dialogue that we can better understand and address the challenges our world is facing today. During its history, the Sultanate of Oman, for more than 1,400 years until today, under the leadership of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, Sultanate of Oman hasn't witnessed any religious or cultural-based conflict, allowing its people to be open to others, connect and interact with the rest of the world, exchanging benefits while drawing upon their deep-rooted culture of tolerance, coexistence, and harmony. We seek to introduce the world to the values we have in the Sultanate of Oman, while looking forward to knowing the different experiences and expertise of others alike. The Sultanate of Oman works on consolidating the values of cultural diversity, acceptance of others, and trust in the three main aspects: legal, educational, and media. Through these three aspects, values can actually be deepened and sustained in individuals for the society to foster mutual respect, human relations, and intercultural dialogue.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think that you deliver key words for this dialogue, and I'm sure that our audience is taking note on it. Is not about communications. Of course, it starts with communications. Of course, it starts to bringing, as Minister Grange also said, everybody around the table. Processes that are inclusive, processes that are respectful, processes that understand others. But that's just the starting point. The real issue is how this process, this inclusive process, can deliver better outcomes. And when delivering better outcomes for people, then reinforcing the fact that we can listen to each other. Now, the context in which we are now is very challenging. And I don't need to tell you, because you are both leaders, you know what are the challenges. The reality is that more and more, be it because of the very unequal world in which we live, inequality is growing in many places, be it because of confrontation at the international level, as we know, be it for COVID, we have seen increased radicalization, increased extremism, increased distrust, I may say, for people that are different. And it can be related to the ethnic, or it can be related to history or legacies. And so my question, and I go back to Minister Grange, is how would you see, in this context in which the trends are not something to write home about, how can we use it to reduce this radical polarization of our societies? Besides, of course, the goal that you have stated so well in delivering for good for everybody. Would you have any advice to give in terms of this reducing of radical views and confrontation?
Interventions using culture. I'm sorry, but could you repeat the question? We speak in relation to social intervention and how we would deal with.
Exactly. No, the point, Minister, is that you said that you bring people together to solve the issues that we are confronting: inequality, climate change, social justice, and but what we see in the world today is not more understanding, but less. And so, do you think that intercultural dialogue can also be a tool to reduce these radical options that are really being used and probably promote for those that want to see division?
Well, I think it is important that we can treat intercultural dialogue through various social intervention programs in order to bridge gaps, in order to bring people on, put them all on the same page, in order to provide that feeling of pride amongst people of various cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So it is an important tool. Intercultural dialogue is an important tool, and certainly is an opportunity to provide the various social intervention that is necessary. Cultural programs, you know, how we use cultural programs to encourage peace, to encourage harmony, and to encourage national pride. And, you know, in Jamaica, we refer to sport as physical culture, and that's an excellent tool to help to promote intercultural dialogue. Look at the Olympics, look at the World Games, and the keen competition, but the spirit of togetherness that it generates throughout the world.
That's a wonderful example, because actually, Minister, besides leading the work on intercultural dialogue in the social and human sciences, I also lead the work on sports. and sports is another tool to bring countries together. But do you have, Minister, an example of a policy decision that you have taken in any area where you feel the outcome has been better because you delivered it through intercultural dialogue, be it in taking decisions related to the portfolio that you are heading? How would that operate? Because I want our audiences to understand how leaders like you, both ministers, are using this way of working to deliver better policy outcomes. Do you have some advice to give to our listeners?
Well, is that question for me or my colleague?
It's a follow-up question for you, and then I will go back to Minister Almamary with exactly the same issues. And then, Minister, because you are always first in the spot, I will do it. The last round of questions, I will start with Mr. Almamary, and then you will close the panel, Minister Grant.
Okay, fine. So we have a national sports policy, and we refer to that the theme or the broad focus of the policy is sports for all. So in treating with intercultural dialogue, we look at culture as even a lifestyle. And in looking at cultures as a lifestyle, it takes in all ages. It takes in those with disabilities. It takes in from the old to the young. And so we have been able to use that as a tool to encourage a national spirit. And so there is a deliberate policy in sports, as we call it, physical culture. And similarly, we have that in our cultural policy and our policy for entertainment. We have been able to use our music to even give to the world the theme of one love through Bob Marley. And these are all deliberate actions that we have taken to promote a spirit of togetherness through intercultural dialogue. What more, can you ask with our reggae music, which was inscribed on the Intangible Cultural Heritage List of humanity, it's UNESCO. Intercultural dialogue through music, intercultural dialogue through sports, intercultural dialogue through a new religion which we gave to the world, a new religion of which Bob Marley was one of its strongest proponents, and that's Rastafari. And so we have been able to use policies to deliberately help us in promoting intercultural dialogue within Jamaica and within the world. Because you say Bolt, you say Jamaica. You say Bob Marley, you say Jamaica. You say One Love, you say Jamaica. And that's what? To the world. You know that sign, to the world? it's all a part of that intercultural dialogue that Jamaica has been able to use as a wonderful tool nationally and internationally.
Well, sorry, Minister, finish, please.
No, I'm saying I hope that, I've been able to transmit that feeling graphically about how we see intercultural dialogue and how important it is.
And Minister, you are. It's going to be difficult to beat you, but I'm sure that Minister Almamary will also bring some of the wonderful contributions that Oman has made to the world. But it's true that this togetherness, the message that I hear from what you are saying and what Minister Almamary said before, is how do we focus on the things that bring us together, and that's I think a very important message. Because yes, I mean, Usain Bolt, who is going to replace him? I don't know. It's just very difficult. Bob Marley, well, it has marked really the lives of so many people. But I think that they might also be the result of this effort to bring better understanding and to put music, to put the soul of the country at the service of bringing people together. And that's why we are also very happy with the presentation of this report. We need to talk and the framework on intercultural dialogue, because I think that we want to capture those elements that have allowed to people to focus on the things that bring them together. And so I want to then move now to Minister Almamary. I will ask a last question and will give both of you reflecting on this, on the question of using this tool also to bring an intergenerational dialogue together. This will be my last point. But for now, Minister Almamary, I would really like to focus on how you have, with very concrete examples, bring the intercultural dialogue to policy solutions to very specific topics. Minister Branch has shown on the question of sports and how music and how she used that for bringing Jamaicans together. I would like to hear from you in which areas, Minister Almamary, you have been able to deploy the intercultural dialogue and bring better solutions, and what do you think this has contributed to bring your people together and focus on what unite them?
Thank you for this for this question. Actually, intercultural dialogue is more important now than ever, and the difficulties around the world need from us all to work together towards intercultural dialogue and also to foster social cohesion between people. For the Sultanate of Oman, as I said earlier, it never happened in our history that any conflict based on religious or background differences between people around the world. And we are working in the government here in the Sultanate of Oman to keep these values that we live in the Sultanate, and also to reflect these values to the world, that whenever any countries or any individuals or societies would like to learn from our experience, so we try also to show the others about our culture, about the values that we live here in the Sultanate of Oman. For us in the Ministry of Endowments and Religious Affairs, we made a lot of policies, and also for the legal, for many different aspects of legal or culture or educational programs, and also on the art. Just to give an examples about some of these initiatives, the international exhibition, Oman's Message of Peace, which started in 2010, and it visited already 130 cities around the world, and it speaks in 28 languages, just to reflect about the importance of living together and bringing people in a common ground between them. We believe in the Sultanate of Oman that differences between people is not a problem. Differences in religion or ethnicity or any other aspect is not a problem between people. when they can come together and dialogue and speak and cooperate and learn from each other. So we focus on the similarities we have and avoid talking about the differences that differentiate between us. So this is the message that we'd like to say to the world, and that differences, we keep it from our traditions and our working aspects, but it doesn't mean that we don't collaborate or live with others and also benefits from each other. This is our message. And also there is the Oman Youth Ship voyage, which that visit international ports in many countries. So, and also in the teaching languages, for example, teaching languages is a tool for transferring people cultures and also fostering intercultural dialogue. So in the Sultanate, there are many institutions to offer scholarship to learn our mother language, Arabic, but also there are many other international institutions to teach other languages as well. So the language is also a tool for intercultural dialogue, and also it keeps people learning about other cultures and languages, which will enable them to understand others better and also to cooperate and work with others deeply.
Thank you so much, Minister. And let me tell you that I was so engaged with both of you. Unfortunately, the Minister of Ghana and the Minister of Iraq could not really connect, which is a pity, but it doesn't matter. I think that I have had the most wonderful conversation with both of you, and so much that we just got out of time for the continuation of the debate. Let me tell you, Mr. Minister Al-Mamary, your ambassador here is the head of the Friends of Gender Group, and he's doing an amazing job, also bringing all these messages that Oman has put to the world. I could not agree more. I mean, Minister Grange has just mentioned about sports, music. You're mentioning languages. And I am Mexican. I'm speaking here with you in English. If you know me in Spanish, you might think that I'm more funny and more, no, I don't know. The reality is that languages is culture. Languages is opening our minds, but it's also part of bringing people together. So yes. I would only ask you to close this fantastic panel, and I wish I have you here in Paris to then follow up the conversation bilaterally. But I just want you to give me 1 minute message for the younger generations, because this is one issue, the intergenerational transmission. We know that some of our youngsters are not very happy with the outcomes of the world. So I would like you to finish with that. And then I will pass the floor to my dear Ana Maria Magloff to take over with the experts. But I have to say that I really enjoyed this conversation with the both of you, and I hope that we will continue working on this very important topic. So Minister Al-Mamary and then Minister Grange, you will close the session. But Al-Mamary, please.
Thank you very much. I think intercultural dialogue is very important, as I said, and it is very essential element now in our societies. If we see in the media and in the social media the hate speech and other crimes that appear, it gives us also responsibility to work together on the intercultural dialogue and also to foster the dialogue between people, and also to enhance the importance of tolerance and understanding and coexistence between people. And I said, if the world refuses to be united by peace, security, and harmony efforts, it will be united by feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, and fear of the future.
Wonderful, wonderful message. Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for sharing this. And thank you also for being in the publication. Minister Grange, please.
you so much. And to my colleague minister, I thoroughly, enjoyed your contribution. And I just want to say we spoke about culture, sports, and language, and I would like to add technology. And if we're really talking about young people, technology is something that they buy into right away. And through technology, we have been able to have this intercultural dialogue. And I think it's really, really important that we have utilized technology in this way as well. And I just want to quickly close by just quoting Bob Marley from a song, No Woman, No Cry. And he says, I remember when we used to sit in a government yard in Trenchtown. Georgie would cook the firelight, logwood burning through the night, and we would cook cornmeal porridge, of which I'd share with you. My feet are my only carriage. I'm going to push on through. No woman, no cry. And what Marley is saying, he's painting a picture of sharing in a meal prepared by different persons. Having a hand in the preparation is one of the most powerful metaphors of intercultural dialogue that goes beyond conversation into shared activity anchored in mutual respect. And this is the kind of dialogue that will have a lasting impact on the process of transformation by way of intercultural dialogue. It speaks to and generate issues of social cohesion, freedom of expression, stability and nonviolence, leadership and organization, horizontal equality, inclusion and representation, linkages, coherency, skills and values, all domains of intercultural dialogue as set out by UNESCO. I really want to thank you for inviting me to participate this morning. I wish we had more time because I have so much to say. But thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And Minister, it was great meeting you via technology.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, but both ministers were fantastic. And I have to say that this is just the beginning of the conversation. The panel today was, we need to talk. I would say that we really are exchanging on how to build better. And I want to say to our listeners that I'm sure they are fascinated by what Minister Grange and Minister Almamari had shared with us. I want to tell you that these two countries are part of our success cases of this publication. So I invite you to read also the chapters of both countries with many others. And I really want to thank these fantastic leaders. You saw why we invited them. I was very, very privileged. It was my privilege to conduct this first introductory panel with our dear ministers. We will keep in touch. Thank you so much. And Ana Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. One love.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. I hope that our panelists are connected. Yes. Excellent. So I am very happy to welcome you to the second panel as we launch the UNESCO framework for enabling intercultural dialogue and also the flagship We Need to Talk. My name is Ana Maria Majlöv, and I am the Chief of the Inclusion, Rights and Dialogue section at UNESCO headquarters. And I'm very happy to join you as moderator for this expert panel. Now, following the wonderful insights of our ministers, we will now be turning to a group of experts for a look at how organizations and also activists are really using intercultural dialogue as a tool for peace, for conflict prevention, and also for human rights. Now, we have all seen what happened during COVID, and in the face of increasing levels of racism, discrimination, and violence, we believe that there is an urgent need to develop joint solutions to these challenges and to build trust. That is also very important. So each of the panelists today have seen how dialogue can transform communities. And I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Andrew Gilmore, Ms. Asako Okai, Ms. Karabo Mokgoniana, and Mr. Wayne El-Gassim. And I will quickly read your bios. Now, we start with Andrew Gilmore. He joins us from the Berghoff Foundation, where he has been the executive director since May 2020. And prior to this, he served 30 years with United Nations, most recently as Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. He has also held senior UN positions in several conflict zones, including Iraq, South Sudan, the Middle East, the Balkans, Afghanistan, and West Africa. A very impressive list. Moving on to Asako, having served for over 30 years in the Japanese Foreign Service and the United Nations, Asako Okai joins us from her current post as Assistant Secretary General at UNDP and also Director of the Crisis Bureau. She has held several senior diplomatic positions worldwide and also worked closely with the United Nations headquarters, both in the permanent mission of Japan to the UN and also as a senior member of the Office of the President of the 66th UN General Assembly. Now, Karabo Mokgoniana, she joins us as an award-winning activist and lawyer from South Africa. She is the African Youth Ambassador for Peace with the African Union, the coordinator of the Commonwealth Youth Human Rights and Democracy Network, and also the campaigns coordinator at change.org. In fact, Karabo, you have all the global priorities and priorities in you on behalf of UNESCO, both Africa, gender equality, and youth. And finally, Wayne El-Gassim joins us with 25 years of experience in conflict preventions, meditation, and peacekeeping. And currently serving as the special representative of the Secretary General for Mali and head of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali. He previously held several leadership positions with the African Union, including as director of the Commission, Peace and Security Department, and head of the Conflict Management Division. He also contributed to the development of the African Union's key strategy and policy on conflict prevention and resolution. So again, a warm welcome to all of you. We don't have much time, so we have 45 minutes. So I would appreciate if each panelist can speak for a maximum 2 to 3 minutes to answer the questions. If you don't, I will have to cut you, I'm sorry. So let's go to Wayne El-Gassim. I would like to start by turning to you. The data in the report shows that 89% of current conflicts occur in countries where intercultural dialogue is weak. And looking to your experience in conflict prevention and peacekeeping, how do you explain this? Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
We can see you.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. I will try to be brief, and I may have certainly to leave you at some point because I have another commitment at 3 p.m. But first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations to UNESCO for this initiative. And I would also like to take the opportunity to express my appreciation to your representative here, Mr. Edmond, for his close cooperation with MINUSMA in the pursuit of our shared objective. And I'm also happy to see on the screen my good friend, Andrew Gilmore, with whom I have worked very, very closely at the UN in New York. Very happy to see you, Andrew. Maybe just to say that Mali is, in relation to the topic of this discussion, a particularly interesting country, one that has a very rich culture, one in which various communities have traditionally lived together and bridged their differences through traditional conflict resolution mechanism. And I believe one tool which is extremely well known, guiding principles well known, are seen through the Kurugan Fuga, 13th century text, which of course is absolutely critical for us to understand the efforts being made here. And to this, I will add that Timbuktu, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is also one of the greatest symbols of intercultural dialogue. However, for a variety of reasons, since 2012, I would say, these mechanisms have not been, seriously weakened. That's the reality we're dealing with currently. And Timbuktu, which is now cut off from its spaces of intercultural dialogue, has become a prey for violent extremists, even though everything in the city, from the libraries to the ancient manuscripts, really shows a history of tolerance and social cohesion. One can make the same comment about Bandiagara in the central part of the country, traditionally cosmopolitan city, which is marked by social cohesion and close relationship between the Fulani and the Dogon communities, a link which is so strong that a Dogon religious mask represents a Fulani. The traditional authority as chief of village is usually rotates between the Dogon and the Fulani communities and so on. And this is really, I would say the context which prevailed before the onset of the current crisis. In this context, of course, the reconciliation efforts being pursued by the UN, including by MINUSMA, plays a very heavy focus on the role that communities can play and on the fact that in the past, these communities have lived in peace throughout Mali's history. And here, I would like to express appreciation to UNESCO for our partnership in the project entitled Prevention of Hate Speech in Mali through research and training of local populations, which was developed and implemented by UNESCO with funding from MINUSMA, and which has contributed significantly to preventing and combating hate speech between Dogon and Fulani communities. I also would like to say that intercultural and inter-community dialogue is practiced by MINUSMA to mediate conflicts, address root causes and differences among communities. We are active in the field of cultural heritage restoration. We're active in Bandiagara, Timbuktu, of course, in cooperation with UNESCO. We are also actively involved in the organization of festivals that can bring communities together in training and sensitization that emphasize tolerance and the importance of reviving intercultural dialogue between communities. Once more, many thanks to UNESCO for this opportunity, and I look forward, of course, to strengthening our cooperation here in the field in the context of this report. And I'm sure the recommendations made will go a long way in helping us bring about greater efficiency to the efforts being made in the field. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. It's interesting because everything that you said is really aligned with the upscaling of our work to combat racism, discrimination, and of course, hate speech. So it was very, very, very nice, your answer. Let me turn to Andrew Gilmore. Now, building on what's just said, I would like to ask you, how have you seen intercultural dialogue transform communities during, but also post-conflict?
Well, thank you so much. Like my friend Juan, I'd also like to say there's a great initiative by UNESCO, and I like the report very much, and I particularly like the case studies. But in fact, if I could just say, all the case studies are countries that are, fortunately for them, not in conflict. And I know you've obviously invited me as the head of a conflict organization in Berlin, the Berkhoff Foundation. And I think in the community I work in, the peacemaking, peace building and mediation, we don't talk about intercultural dialogue so much. This is by no means in opposition to the UNESCO approach, it's a complementary. But after all, I mean, Samuel Huntington's great Clash of Civilizations was essentially wrong. It's not cultures that fight each other. It's communities or even individuals. And I think that that's quite an important distinction to make. After all, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not about contrasting cultures. It's about a historic land dispute and expulsion of population and a resistance to occupation. In the Balkans, it's about communities. In Iraq, it was a combination of Arab Kurdish ethnic or Sunni Shia religion. One has just been talking about Mali and the Dogon and Fulani communities. So I think it's quite important to keep that slight distinction. And when we try and set up dialogue, whatever we call it, whether it's intercultural, intercommunity, national, political, whatever, it's not that, it's communities and people, individuals. It's not about putting in it's not about a homogenous culture in opposition. So we trying to play down the fact when it's an issue of a country in conflict that it's an intercultural dispute. But what we try to do is sort of build up a storytelling aspect to dialogue, whether it's in Georgia, Abkhazia, whether it's the Shiraka assemblies in Somalia and many other places where we work. It's getting people to understand, first of all, their own narrative, and as individuals, because after all, it's much easier to feel empathy for an individual and a story you hear that might really touch you than it is to feel empathy for a government or some other entity, let alone a rival community or a historic enemy. So these are some of the ways that I would say we approach the intercultural dialogue approach, but which we don't so much call that, rather more intercommunal.
Thank you very, very much. I liked when you said storytelling. That is exactly what we're doing through several projects. We have the masterclasses against racism and discrimination for youth, but we also have the story circles that is focusing more on adults. So storytelling is definitely something that we believe in. Thank you for that. Turning now to Asako Okai, very often with conflict comes displacement. So the data in our report shows that 91% of refugees in 2020 were from countries with weak intercultural dialogue. And also in the same year, 52% of refugees would also settle in countries with weak intercultural dialogue. So my question for you is, what is the role you see that intercultural dialogue can play in the displacement crisis and also in ensuring the inclusion of the displaced?
Thank you, Anna Marie, for the question. Like others, I would like to start off with congratulating you and UNESCO and IEP for developing this useful framework. UNDP, the partner with UNESCO, in terms of the relevance to this topic of today, especially around the co-chairing of the working group of the prevention and the countering violent extremism under the UNOCT Office of Counterterrorism chairmanship. And we have been closely working, and actually this development of this framework will only help to strengthen our work on the field. The UNDP has the many programs related to improving intercultural dialogue. We counted as many as 42 countries, and then it's a prevention of violent extremism portfolio, together with the addressing online and offline hate speech and disinformation in 40 countries. So going back to your initial question, I mean, how does it matter in displacement issues when we have the record high, historical high level of displacement, which amounts to more than 100 million? I mean, it's absolutely essential to have this intercultural dialogue. I mean, it's the displacement always is a part of the structural the exclusion of people on the move, and then this intercultural dialogue can help support us in including them in. Our experience on the field, ranging from the UNDP's activity at the country level to the interagency effort to implement the global compacts for migration and on refugees shows that the inclusivity is built on intercultural dialogue, providing spaces to all stakeholders to contribute, including migrants themselves. I see about 4 roles. We can categorize into 4 roles what this intercultural dialogue can play. I mean, as obviously, first and foremost, it is the important tool for strengthening social cohesion. Intercultural dialogue can offer deeper understanding and interaction and interdependency of that provide the basis for the conflict and peace building, and then also notably by the root causes of migration and displacement and drivers of that, such as the weak or non-inclusive governance system. Secondly, intercultural dialogue, when part of broader integration efforts of the needs and the interests of displaced group into overall plans for local development can foster socio-economic recovery and development toward the equity, growth, and prosperity for all. It's going to be the very base for planning. Thirdly, intercultural dialogue can also be a means to strengthen the resilience of states and societies so that they can change and adapt to 21st century challenges, including that of displacement. Fourthly, intercultural dialogue can further provide platforms for inclusivity, even voice of displaced populations, including displaced minorities and vulnerability groups, by empowering them, their agency in relation to their current situation, and then for a future. This is critically important. Ana Maria, I know that you have given me only 2 minutes, but given that I have other commitments, let me dwell on a bit of the complexity of the issues that they are centered around this, the lack of faith, the reduced trust. I would like to thank Gabriela when she mentioned at the outset in opening about the Human Development Report that UNDP issued 2 weeks ago. And then it is about uncertainty and unsettled life. And then one of the findings was the uncertainty. It can spur political polarization and then reduce trust in one another and divide society and undermines their public deliberation. So polarization is much more than the simple differences of preferences. And then that is much to do with the deepening social divide between groups that can ultimately push opposing groups toward more extreme positions. So this can diminish the scope for cooperation, global solidarity, common challenges that we confront. And then I would like to echo the findings that presented by David, that the strong correlation between the intercultural dialogue and the peace building, peacefulness, conflict prevention, and human rights protection. And then I think to move forward in this world of the colliding crisis, and then the world with the uncertainty and the sense of instability throughout, I think the cultural dialogue is the foundation for us moving ahead. And Ana Maria, and then the colleagues, excellencies, excuse me, I need to go on to the different engagement. I have my staff, UNDP, present in this meeting, and then if you can follow up in the further the questions, that would be very much appreciated. Sorry, there has been a misunderstanding of the end of the time. Sorry, back over to you, Ana Maria.
Thank you so much, Ms. Okay, and thank you for the time. I think that everything that you said could actually be used as good practices by UNESCO. So thank you very much, and we will absolutely catch up with you. over to Karabo Mokgoniana, and I would just wonder if Wayne El-Gassim could stay, so we can ask him one more question after. But I will start with you, Karabo. Now, we've heard of the importance of upholding dignity through dialogue with crisis situations, and there's still work to be done, of course, to get us from where we are to where we want to be in terms of uplifting marginalized communities and preserving human rights. So what do you think? How can intercultural dialogue help uphold dignity and preserve respect against the backdrop of growing fragility, conflict, and violence?
Thank you so much, Anna Maria. Good evening, Excellencies and Ambassadors, and all protocols observed. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak on this panel, and I'd like to equally extend what has already been said to congratulate UNESCO on this important framework, not only for international discourse, but also for, intercultural dialogues at community level. Now, to answer your question, I'd like to start off by referring to, a philosophy that we have in South Africa that is called Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. And it carries, or it embodies, interdependency, community, humanity towards others, respect, and upholding the dignity of all people. And it acknowledges the next person. And I think that's what intercultural dialogues really embody as well. It has the very same effect, and it says, I see you and I want to understand your perspectives, your narratives, your identity, and I want to coexist with you. So I think that intercultural dialogues really do have such a big effect in terms of, marginalized communities. And in light of the growing fragility, conflict, and violence across the world, I think that in terms of answering the how, I would say intercultural dialogues have to be three things. And in order for them to be as effective as we would really want them to have, particularly in light of the fragilities, but also in light of marginalized communities and identities. I'd say the first one really is we would have to design intercultural dialogues according to context. I do not believe that a one-size-fits-all model of intercultural dialogues would really work. I think, intercultural dialogues at community level wouldn't be the same as at an international level. In a specific community would not be the same as well. So I think we need to always design intercultural dialogues with context in mind, and that is how we achieve effectiveness of these sort of dialogues. But at the same time, community level dialogues that are owned and speared by people on the ground is very essential. And in as much as, this framework is very much high level, I think its effectiveness will really show at community level, and how much of shaping in terms of the intercultural dialogues I had, because this is where the conflicts are happening. This is where, the insecurity is happening, and we need to make sure that it trickles down. But at the same time, I think the best way is for these intercultural dialogues to be speared by the very people at community level. And I think the last thing really is, it is important to make sure that there is effective representation in these intercultural dialogues. So who is participating in these dialogues is very essential, because if you have intercultural dialogues that exclude marginalized identities, or for example, an intercultural dialogue in a conflict-ridden community that does not include the young people, that doesn't include women or anybody from marginalized identities, then it won't necessarily be as effective. So how I foresee this, being as effective in terms of the implementation is really for us to trickle it down to community level, but also to ensure that in who is at these dialogues, it's very important that representation and effective representation is actually achieved. But I'm really excited to see how this framework is going to shape intercultural dialogues, particularly in light of the peace and security issues that are emerging across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It is very interesting what you said, because all the speakers have actually mentioned the importance of local communities and also the importance of reaching out to the most vulnerable segments of society. And we at UNESCO, of course, fully agrees with you. And that is, it is so important to involve them in the entire decision process, all the interest groups from the beginning, but until the end. So we have lost 2 speakers, which means that the 2 of you will have more time, which is a very good thing. So Andrew, I'll go back to you now. We have talked about the contribution of dialogue to security and peace building issues, but we also know that COVID-19 intensified structural and systematic discrimination and of course inequalities. And here also I speak about gender-based inequalities, which as we all know has harmed millions of people and has divided our societies. So where do you see dialogue as having potential in tackling these issues and really building back better?
Well, on the issue of COVID, obviously it's been an utter disaster and remains so for vast sections of the world's population. But actually, on the issue of peace-building dialogues, the news isn't all bad. I know that UNDP, Asako has left, but her colleagues there, UNDP has done work in various places, including the Philippines, Mindanao, and Nepal, which has found that local peace-building efforts have in fact been strengthened during the COVID period, particularly women's mediator groups that are made up, that were drawn from various communities and who were established to work as a sort of early warning mechanism for conflict, but also from different ethnic groups, and to serve, and they've become more active and more organized, partly in response to providing humanitarian assistance to really badly affected communities, and that has strengthened them and their ties with one another. So that I think is not so as I said, it's not all bad news when it comes to COVID. And oddly enough, the very fact that what we're doing right now has had i.e. meeting virtually, it is so much more frequent than pre-COVID. And that has a positive effect in some forms of dialogue. And the Berkowitz Foundation has done an immense amount of virtual peace-building dialogues, intercommunal dialogues, through virtual means that were not possible before. Perhaps even more than COVID, though, is I think perhaps we should look at climate change. And that, of course, for most people, it is the defining aspect of our age and for future generations too. But one aspect of it, I think the world is really unprepared for, and that is the incredibly strong likelihood, in my view, that millions of refugees will be driven out of their countries by the just inability to maintain their livelihoods and perhaps even their existence under extreme heat in large parts of the world. And we know how that affects societies. Now, in your excellent case study of Finland, which has a really great record in intercommunal dialogue and in human rights across the board, actually, you do in your study point out how anti-immigrant parties, political parties on the far right in particular, and we know that throughout Europe, funded and supported through the Russian government, actually, there's an anti-immigrant sentiment, and in the United States, of course, which will be in a way strengthened by the increase of immigrants coming in and refugees. And I think that the countries of the West, and those are the countries that will be the preferred choice of destination of climate refugees, are in no way ready for this. And I think that in a way that the most useful thing they could do at this point is to start preparing their populations for the, frankly, inevitability of large numbers of climate refugees. And that is a sort of form of intercultural dialogue taking place not in countries of conflict, which, as I said earlier, is not really appropriate to talk about intercultural conflict, rather intercommunal. But when it comes to the more developed countries or more peaceful countries, i.e. the countries that are also going to be the likely countries of destination, then there needs to be far greater preparation for the intercultural dialogue that will be necessary to keep tensions down once the numbers of climate refugees who will be literally forced. I mean, one cannot possibly claim that they are just economic migrants. These will be people unable to live in their countries. So that is something that I think all of us need to do a lot more preparation for than is currently being the case.
Thank you very much. Here again, you gave us a very good idea, and we can also use that as a good practice for UNESCO for future work. I'm very happy that you mentioned women's mediator groups. As we all know, COVID was absolutely terrible when it comes to violence against women. It was actually called the shadow pandemic, and it went up to almost 77% in some countries. That is a lot. So, of course, the role of women, especially in peace building and conflict, has changed over the time, but also since COVID. So that is also something that we're focusing a lot on. Karabo, I'm going to go back to you now. And this question is really linked to one of UNESCO's 2 global priorities, as I said in the beginning, Africa and gender equality. And maybe, Andrew, you would like to reflect on this also. We have seen that countries with weak intercultural dialogue are up to 77% lower on gender equality. And given this finding, in what ways do you believe that intercultural dialogue can be leveraged for gender equality? Because this is a very important topic. Over to you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. I think I'll start off by acknowledging what Andrew had mentioned just in relation to the role that women play in terms of humanitarian interventions at community level. And I think that's where really my response stems from. The fact that, intercultural dialogues, especially those that happen within the context of community, bring to light the fact that there are role players at community level, and women play a role within these, interventions and in any sort of relief that takes place at community level. And in not necessarily including them in these conversations, you are indirectly saying that you do not want to necessarily effectively resolve whatever it is that is happening at community level. So the intercultural dialogues basically say your voice and your narratives matter. And even with your difference in background, your difference in identity, may not necessarily always unfold in that manner, but intercultural dialogues have the effect of then putting pressure on those that sit at the tables to say that there is actually a missing voice. And I think you'll see it sometimes in the kind of interventions that actually come out of these intercultural dialogues in the event that they miss intersectional considerations that come from women. So we see that the interventions are not necessarily sustainable, because then you have women who are meant to actually, take these interventions and implement them, but at the same time, the lack of ownership, the lack of clarity, and, the lack of their perspective within them is, it's kind of unavoidable, and you see it within it's almost like half-baked interventions that are then created. But at the same time, the spaces in itself create a safe space for marginalized identities to actually have conversation and be heard. And I think intercultural dialogues actually force that into, they actually contribute positively to gender equality, because those voices are essential. Otherwise, it's really not as conducive to have these conversations without those important voices. And equally, then, women then can bring to light intersectional issues that are not necessarily considered, because often they are viewed as recipients of, the harm that is, within peace and security issues. But at the same time, the role that they play in terms of the active humanitarian role that they actually play is not necessarily always considered. But I think in light of this, and one key thing that is important then is the capacity building and technical support that is required. And in speaking about, intercultural dialogues, I do feel like we need to equally speak on the importance of then contributing to the capacity building of women to ensure that, within these conversations, they not only are contributing, but are being heard substantively so, but they're able to really own the intersectional interventions that they actually bring forward, because majority of them, if not all, are actually valuable. However, now in intercultural dialogues, you then also need to, capacitate people who are then on the other side, who then have to, sit with women and have these conversations and possibly dismantle their narratives that women don't necessarily have a role to play in these sort of dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I have another small question for you. After COVID, have you seen a change in the attitudes of young women to want to be more involved in peace building and conflict prevention?
Absolutely. I think there's a bigger eagerness, from young women to be a part of these conversations. And I think the one big thing that has contributed is actually, hearing people who don't identify as us make decisions for us. And that gap alone, we see it to be quite problematic, because a lot of the times the issues that we face as young women, whether it's in peace building contexts or just in relation to social issues, are not necessarily effectively represented. The best people to actually speak on these issues and possibly recommend the best solutions to them is us. And it's been very frustrating to watch conversations happen about, gender equality, young women and peace building, but we're not necessarily at the table. We're not leading some of these conversations. We're not actually being involved. So I think for the first time, we are seeing an even greater network of young women who want to come, but we also want to open up the space for more young women to come into the conversation. And that may also mean, a lot of capacity building, because we understand that some of these spaces can be very technical, and it does take some form of capacity building for us to be able to effectively engage in these sort of conversations.
Thank you very, very much. And that obviously is very important, just what you said. I see that we have been joined by Ms. Okai's colleague, Nika Saidi, who's a team leader for the prevention of violent extremism in UNDP. Now, Andrew, this also goes in line with your question about the climate change. So, Nika, can I also ask you a question?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. Happy to join here. It has been a fascinating discussion, and I have been following it. So happy to step in since RHG Circle couldn't be here.
Much appreciated. So, according to you, can intercultural dialogue serve as an outlet for cooperation for solutions around the climate emergency? What do you think, and how?
Yeah, fascinatingly, when we are thinking about the climate, let's put it human-induced climate change. Well, that's what we are dealing with. And if it has been exacerbated by the people, can be resolved by the people. And the intercultural dialogue, it's a way forward. Just to add, for example, the way we are looking through UNDP, our climate security colleagues, because we have a team which is working jointly with across different UN agencies with our colleagues in DPPA as well. So the whole climate security mechanism has been looking into organizing intercultural dialogues. And with our partners, UN IOM, we have organized dialogue, involve national actors, civil society, non-governmental organization, and vulnerable and people who are in a vulnerable context and situation, including women, including the one that mostly are not seen in many of these dialogue. And thank you, Karabo, for raising the importance of who we are not bringing to the space to have a discussion and dialogue with them. We see and we ensure that the needs of these groups are taken into account and consideration. So first is listening, ability to listen and have a consultation with them. And that's what we do. The second is being able to identify the solutions. And it's only through the dialogue we can come and identify a solution that is agreeable by and with everyone. And that's not a new initiative, but that's a way forward. And the whole point is it's becoming more complex and complex to bring this diverse group, because when we are talking about intercultural dialogue, it's not only anymore between the different ethnicities. It's also looking at the role of individual, the community and institution as the true protagonists, and how all of them joining to hold this discussion when it comes to the climate issue. It's a group of people who are dealing with the security issue as well as group of the people who are dealing with the climate. There is no separate discussion anymore. So through our different work stream, we are promoting that dialogue in many forms. It's happening across different country offices. Colleague mentioned UNDP has been engaged. This is the bread and butter of our work, and we are going to continue building on that. But the nuances is more important than holding these spaces. And ability to listen is something we have identified, and I'm going to answer more about the importance of the mental health and psychosocial support, because people are not a plain book that they come to a dialogue and just they sit and listen and contribute to a discussion. People coming with the packages, people coming with the trauma. We are all engaging through different perspectives. Are we listening? Let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. In fact, what you said also joined what Andrew said in the beginning about the importance of individuals. So I have one question left for all of you. So going back to Andrew, we have seen that human rights conditions are deteriorating in many, many parts of the world. And the data, or our data, actually shows that countries with stronger enabling environments for intercultural dialogue have better protection of human rights. Why is it so important, according to you, for governments and organizations to foster intercultural dialogue to protect communities?
Right. Well, one of the things I liked about your framework and the case studies is that it does underline how important various forms of human rights, whether it's freedom of the press, whether it's gender equality, whether it's Oman being a bastion of coexistence with different sects of Islam, or whatever, human rights is absolutely fundamental to a successful form of stabilization and basically a peaceful coexistence and development. Now, in my field of conflict, in fact, I once said this to those countries that are most opposed to bringing human rights into the Security Council. I once asked 3 members of the Council, Egypt, Russia, and China, who were opposed to my participation as a chief of human rights, even being in the Council. Look, can you think of a single conflict, internal conflict, that is, and I'm not talking about an external invasion where human rights is not the cause, but basically, can you actually think of one country of internal conflict on your Security Council agenda that is not at heart about the violations of human rights in some form? Now, it can be repression, or it can be discrimination and exclusion. So human rights is absolutely at the core of conflict, and therefore the need for dialogue. I would just say, in the sense that human rights education is of cardinal importance to both intercultural dialogue and also to the intercommunity dialogue of conflict zones. And teaching people, because if you don't know what your rights are, how can you fight for them and how can you defend the rights of others? But it's also about, when it comes to the rights of others, understanding their historical narratives. And if I could just give you the example of the tale of 2 museums where the historical narrative connected to human rights is done in such a different way. If you take, for example, you go to the town of Derry or Londonderry in Northern Ireland, there is a museum. You go in, and on the left side of the wall, there is the Catholic, Irish, nationalist perception of history. And on the right-hand side, you have the unionist, Protestant, pro-British line. And as you go through yard by yard, it's the same period of history looked at through different eyes. Both narratives are considered equally valid. And in a country of a free press, that is possible to express. If you go, however, to the museum in Kigali, there is a very different approach there. There, it is one narrative, and exclusively one narrative. One community has always been the victim, and the other community has always been the perpetrator of massive human rights violations. That, to me, doesn't seem a museum that's going to promote intercultural dialogue or stability if you only have one version of history and don't allow the other version. And I think, and that is, it's very connected to human rights, not only the fact that we're talking about mass violations of human rights, but also the ability to have a free press or a free expression of your own community's history. That is an example that I think is a pretty important one, actually.
Thank you very, very much. I've been told that we have to hurry up. So, Karabo, let me turn now to the practical applications. Youth and children are our future. And to build back better, they must have a seat at the table. How have you seen intercultural dialogue leveraged by youth and again, by young women?
Thank you. So let me start by saying there's so much value in intercultural dialogues for youth because I think for the longest time we've been really pushing, and we still are pushing for a seat at the table, to be in conversations and to just contribute to dialogues in relation to either decision making in relation to any sort of social issues, because ultimately they impact us as well. So, but intercultural dialogues have this effect of enabling us to sit at the table, contribute to the conversation, shape the conversation, and possibly contribute to the outcomes of these conversations. And there's so much value in terms of what it has been able to achieve and what it will achieve for us as young people and young women. It's also assisting young people to dismantle the existing intergenerational gap, because there's still an intergenerational gap, but these sort of dialogues then help in dismantling that gap and reducing it and enabling us to have conversations with those that come before us. But in terms of young people are using the most creative ways to have intercultural dialogues, particularly with the age of technology. I think there's a lot of technology usage to leverage on these sort of conversations, but also, in the age of globalization, it's so much easier to actually have these intercultural dialogues across countries, across communities, but also with the, being cognizant of technology gaps in society as well. So we've seen young people participate in like your webinars, your meetings from community level to international level. We're still seeing some of these intercultural dialogues happen at community levels. There's a community in South Africa where young people actually come together every Friday under a specific tree. And they actually speak about the social issues that, that are happening at community level, their ambitions, and the things that they actually want to see change at community level. So we still have traditional ways that young people are engaging in this conversation. But at the same time, there's then the alternative ways of engaging in intercultural dialogues, and that is the use of arts, the use of storytelling, the use of social media to trigger conversations that we may not ordinarily have, in a household context or even just at community level. So we're using all forms of means, media, we're using just equally traditional means to say, we want to have these sort of conversations and dialogues, and we see the value of actually having them. Yes, we may not engage in them in the most conventional way, where we just sit and have a conversation. But even our ways of moving, the manner in which intercultural dialogues are actually happening, but also they're being effective as well. We're seeing more and more young people then want to participate. And I think that's what's important, having means that means of intercultural dialogue where young people are willing to come to the table is also important, but also young people are creating these platforms themselves. So it's very exciting times, and intercultural dialogues are definitely going to be moving the manner in which young people engage and sit at the table and have these conversations. What's even greater is seeing young people then lead intercultural dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. Social media is a fantastic tool. It can also be a very dangerous tool. As you know, youth is one of UNESCO's priorities, and we have a lot of networks. And I think it would be interesting to connect our youth networks with yours. So we should absolutely do that soon in the future. Now, final question would be for Nika, and thank you very, very much again for being with us. Now, our data shows that 1.5 billion people live in countries with low levels of communication between groups where global challenges such as poverty, terrorism, or even forced displacement are more prevalent. So in your opinion, what role can intercultural dialogue play in tackling interconnected humanitarian development and security challenges?
Interestingly, as I was listening to Karabo and the role of social media and the young people, I was just thinking about the challenge we are facing, the globalizations. We are not anymore people that belongs to the community that are the houses around us. Sometimes we live in, especially urban area, which is 60% of the world's population almost live in urban area, that people are more connected through online means than actually connected to their neighborhood. What does that mean in terms of the intercultural dialogue? What culture, the global culture that it's going online means? We know some of it, and the young people are better to speak on that than me, but we all see and feel, and especially the last 2.5 years of the COVID told us that many people have multi-layer of connection that are going and expanded beyond the people around them. So what does that mean? We have seen that, and that's why the violent extremism, and thank you so much for all the data that UNESCO has put together, 89% of the deaths from terrorism occurred in countries where dialogue is formed. This is important to have. But the importance of the whole PVE, which in UNDP we actually don't call it really PVE, we are calling it increasing tolerance and diversity. That's the name we have for that. It was the acknowledgement that we are not anymore talking about communities within people connecting just within a community, people connecting across borders, across ways we could control, assumption. So what does that mean actually, this online engagement? And we have realized that it has created quite unacceptable challenges. And if you heard about the news, we might now have a global internet that's going to provide internet across the world. What does that mean? That the people now easily accessing and connecting and moving across. So these are the areas we are all exploring as moving forward. We know, and Andrew also mentioned the importance of the freedom of expression, the human rights dimension, but also we see a mental breakdown in people. The exacerbation of information, the level of even maneuvering what is right, what is not right. And it's not only about the young people. Which information is correct, which information is not correct. And Andrew mentioned the incitement to hatred. We see it in all levels. So the importance of the mental health and psychosocial support, it's becoming more prevalent in helping and facilitating and maneuvering the engagement and participation in intercultural dialogues. Being able to also discuss the impact of the COVID. In many communities around the world, we see there is a lack of acknowledgement what people have gone through over the last 2.5 years. In many societies, the acknowledgement of the impact, the study and the better understanding, how it has changed our culture. Culture is not static, it's evolving. How our cultures look like, the way we were communicating and connecting and talking, where we were in 3 years ago in different parts of the world to now. So these are all, and unfortunately, in many ways, while an extremist group are more active because they're sometimes very well connected to the people. Are we stepping up above the knowledge that they have gained and the ability they have to maneuver the system? Are we bringing anthropologists? Are we diversifying the skills we have, the way we are thinking of the human, as a spiritual, intellectual, physical beings? These are all complexity. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the Human Development Report, and I'm a UNDP staff, and I'm so proud of the Human Development Report, even if it wasn't a UNDP for all the world, because it talks about uncertain times. And we need to increase the dialogue in any way, any forms, across different levels, generation, and culture plays an important role. So Anne-Marie, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm also very happy that you mentioned the threat to mental health. And of course, not only focusing on youth, but it has been a real threat also on well-being, especially after COVID. So you're right, COVID changed a lot. I would like to give each one of you the floor for maximum 1 minute, maybe for a couple of final words, and also which are your recommendations to UNESCO? Andrew, over to you.
Very quickly, one, we must avoid, all of us, when it comes to countries in conflict, giving the impression that the conflict is based on conflicting cultures. That would be a mistake. So intercultural dialogue is one thing, but we must ensure that the conflict isn't presented as one between civilizations or cultures, because they will be that even harder to resolve. Secondly, we must all focus on human rights education and climate education and peace education as a way of creating the conditions for successful intercultural dialogue. And thirdly, particularly the countries of the West need to start preparing for the immense intercultural dialogue exercise that will be required when millions of climate change refugees are forced to leave their countries. Over.
Thank you very, very much. Karabo?
Thank you. So I think that the first thing is really intercultural dialogues cannot necessarily be homogeneous, and that they need to give context to communities. They need to give context to who's participating in the conversations. So it can never be a one-size-fits-all model, and may need to just explore what these models look like in relation to different contexts. I think the second thing really is around, to echo what Andrew was saying around the education part, capacity building is very key, particularly to those people who are playing a role at community level, but also for marginalized identities who have not necessarily always been at the table, and who are, seeking to be at the table and engage in these intercultural dialogues, but also be effective. And I think the last thing really is we need to then scrutinize who is within these dialogues, because if we have intercultural dialogues that don't have effective representation, then they are perpetuating exclusion, and that is not what we want. We want to make sure that these intercultural dialogues are effective for everyone at play. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I understand that Mika left. So in that case, let me thank you really once again. You have been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. And as I said, we're really looking forward to working with all of you to put the framework to use in contexts where dialogue is needed the most. So we will absolutely reach out to you very quickly after this call. So this brings us to the end of this panel. Thank you very much. So, dear panelists and audience, this is now the closure of today's event. We were very honored to have high-level participation from ministers from Ghana, Iraq, Jamaica, and Oman, and delighted to benefit from expert perspectives from civil society, the UN, and also for the young people. And thank you very much to the experts for having replied to the last question about recommendations. Now, this framework for enabling intercultural dialogue and also the flagship We Need to Talk are really intended to be operational tools, something very practical and concrete that can be used to help improve policy and practice. And when I speak about policy, of course, it is the design and the implementation of inclusive policies and practice to better support dialogue, combat anti-racism and anti-discrimination, enhance gender equality, and promote social inclusion. Now, over the coming months, we intend to organize policy dialogue at country level, taking really a deep dive into data and identifying the actions needed to better support environments where dialogue can actually succeed. So, of course, as I mentioned before, as we move in this direction, we hope that we can count on you, on your collaboration, and on your partnership. So thank you once again, and I wish all of you a great day and a great evening. Goodbye now from UNESCO.